All right, we're going to talk about three similar functions and commands in Pro Tools: commit, freeze, and bounce. We're going to talk about what they do. And basically, what they do is they render tracks, whether it's MIDI data on an instrument track or audio, to another audio file. And it includes the processing that you have inserted on the track. So we'll go through some of that. When would we use these commands? They all would kind of help with conserving processing power or transferring your sessions, slightly different contexts, but we'll talk about that. And then we're going to go over how to do it and some details to think about. So I have my contact session. I have my drums all separated out. I have my bass and my keys. Real quick, let's say I have my bass track and it has some EQ and some compression on it, and I'm starting to get some CPU errors or some dropouts in audio, and playback's getting wonky, and I just need to simplify things for the computer. I'm gonna left click, or I should say right click or control click on the nameplate. I have my options here of freeze, commit, and bounce. Remember, they're similar. Now I'm gonna hit freeze this time, and it's going to take the EQ and the compression, and it's going to burn this MIDI data into an audio file. Now, this is a temporary audio file. I can't edit it. I can't cut it. You can still see the MIDI there. You can see that these have been deactivated, so it's easier on the computer. All of this real-time processing, all these virtual instruments, they are drags on the computer's processing power and RAM. So freeing that up makes things work easier. You can see that this snowflake is illuminated. That's actually always there, and you can freeze or unfreeze simply by clicking on that. So this is a temporary function. It does not create an audio file that you can use later. Again, you can just click on that snowflake. You're going to get your frozen track. Again, it's audio, so it's a bit easier on the computer to play back. Committing. So if I were to, when am I going to use commit tracks? I'm going to use it because in the lab on the iMacs, you might have a different version of Kontakt than we have in the studio. You have different sound presets that you've created on your version of Massive that is not on the computer in the studio or another studio offsite. It's still a Pro Tools studio, so you're going to transfer your session and open it up in Pro Tools, but we want to make sure that all the plugins are kind of safe and we don't have compatibility issues. So in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and highlight by clicking on my kick and then holding down shift and clicking on the keys track. So I have all of these highlighted. I'm going to left click. I'm sorry, I do that again because control is on the left. Right click or hit control click and go to commit. It is going to bring up a window that's asking, okay, we do want to commit the selected tracks. You can consolidate your clips. So for this example, I have these two measures. If you don't consolidate them, they'll remain individual clips, which could be helpful if you want to, edit your audio and stuff. Now, rendering the automation. So if you have automation on your tracks and you want to keep it, you can render that and that will be captured in the audio file. I tend not to do that because when I'm sending something off for that next phase, whether it's to mix it in another room or to record some audio and stuff, I kind of like to have a clean session. But that's, available to you. If you want to burn this kick drum at -5 and not have it go to full volume, if for some reason you're at full volume, it's distorting because it's overdriving the channel, you can hit volume. You have to hit volume in order for this -5 to get captured in your audio file. You can include the sends on the tracks because what's going to happen is that you can it's going to create a new track with an audio file on it. So if you want to already have some sends routed to auxes in the session, it's already set up and you know that you're going to want a reverb, you can include the sends or any group assignments that you have. So if you have your drums all grouped for editing and mixing purposes, you can maintain that group. It's just going to be audio tracks instead of instrument tracks. Where do you want these to go? I want them to go, I've highlighted these things. I want them to go after the last highlighted track. Makes sense to me. What do you want to do with the source tracks? You can hide them and make them inactive. These are all MIDI based tracks. So if you want to have them in your tracks list so that you can come back at a later time and make some changes, hide and make inactive. 99% of the time, that's what I do. You can simply make them inactive, which the only difference is they're going to stay as tracks in your session and get confusing when you go open it up as audio. You can delete the tracks. Personally, I don't want to do that because I like to come back and have options, but you can save as and keep, here's my MIDI version, here's my audio version of the session, or do nothing, which is just going to leave the track there. Now, if you do nothing, you're not helping out with the processing issue, if that is an issue. So let's just go ahead, hide and make inactive, hit OK. Now it is taking all of these tracks, and even though there's no data on the snare track, it is going to give us a snare track because the routing to that track is there. Now, looking at this hi-hat track, I'm a little suspicious. Why is this so quiet? Or why don't I see a waveform? And it's really just because my vertical zoom is fairly low, and it is a quieter track to begin with. It is not, I did not include the volume automation. So the track is still at -4, but that did not get burned into the file. If I included, then literally these waveforms would be smaller or quieter. So all of these are audio now. The reason this is longer is at one point I had some duplication and I didn't highlight properly. So there you go. Sounds the exact same. Now this is ready to go into the studio. I might do something like save as and add mix to it so that I have this version as well as the version with the MIDI tracks. Now this does make a new set of files for you. So if I go into my audio files folder, I now have all of these committed tracks. Last example, and I'm actually going to hit undo so I have my MIDI data again, hopefully. There we go. Last example, bounce. So I'm right clicking or control clicking and bouncing. This is used more for you are going to send off some audio files to someone else who doesn't use Pro Tools. Committing tracks is great if you're going to open up a Pro Tools session and look at audio versus looking at MIDI data. But what if you use someone else uses Studio One or Logic or Cubase or FL or Live? We're just going to send them what are called stems or some files for them to import into their DAW. They will all have the same start time. They'll be able to start working in their situation. So file type, we have these different file types. I would leave it as WAV, and full fidelity, I would send it at the session setup, which in this instance was 24-bit and 48K. Interleaved, so that would make it all stereo tracks. And in this instance, all my tracks are stereo. And now, where do I want these to go? Typically, by default, it would be going into your bounce files folder. I like to leave my bounce files folder just for my mixes, my bounce mixes. That's me. So I'm going to actually create a folder inside of my session folder, and I'm going to call this Another One Bites the Dust-ish stems. Hit create and hit open. So that is now going to that folder, and I'm going to hit bounce. So that looks familiar because it is similar to the bounce mix folder, but in this case, it is actually sending out the individual tracks as files. So once I get that to happen, that did not create anything within the session. That is simply, let's go to the desktop here, desktop. If I open up this folder and look in my, not in the audio files folder, these are my committed files, remember. If I look at my, my stems, here I have WAV files, all right, ready to go. They are all exactly the same size. They have the same start time. So if they're imported into another session, into another DAW, they're going to work. So again, now I have my mix version. I have my MIDI-based version, and we've learned the times how to and when to use commit, freeze, or bounce. Again, committing is more for creating new audio files out of anything, whether they are audio or MIDI, that are going to include the processing that you already have on them. And that's going to create a new track. So if you're going to use Pro Tools in another studio or another room, it helps to avoid processing. It helps to avoid compatibility issues. Freeze is simply about freeing up some processing power, creates a temporary audio file that includes the processing, but you undo it or you do it. It's not something that you're going to use, anywhere else. And then bouncing is primarily for making versions of your audio files that you can then import into another DAW and have your multi-tracks ready to go.